When I first moved into the cabin, I thought it would be peaceful. Quiet, removed from the city, surrounded by trees and the faint smell of pine. The kind of place people dream of escaping to. It was a faded Victorian home tucked deep in the woods, with creaky stairs, tall windows that moaned in the wind, and just enough charm to distract from the isolation. It had been sitting empty for a while, according to the realtor. Needed work. I didn't mind. I wanted solitude. A fresh start. I hadn't expected the loneliness to settle in so quickly, though. The silence was heavy, not comforting like I imagined. More like the house was holding its breath. That night, as I curled up under a wool blanket with a mug of tea, I found myself scrolling through social media on my phone. A trending topic caught my eye. A ghost hunting app claiming to pick up EVP, electronic voice phenomena, by converting random radio static into spirit messages. The reviews were flooded with excited users posting clips of eerie voices, whispers, even conversations. Most of them felt fake, like people were trying too hard to hear something that wasn't there. Then I remembered something. A local paranormal investigator from a podcast I'd listened to once said that these apps weren't just games. He called them windows, little portals that gave people the opportunity to communicate with those whose spirits still linger. I had rolled my eyes when I first heard it. I rolled my eyes again now, but something in me, curiosity, boredom, who knows, pushed me to download it anyway. It was called Echo Trace. Simple interface, black screen with a single glowing red circle. Record. I waited until after midnight, when the woods were pitch black outside and the wind had gone still. I turned off the lights, settled into the armchair near the fireplace, and pressed the button. White noise blared from the speaker immediately, a loud, hissing static that filled the room like steam. It lasted for about a minute. Nothing happened. Just static. I almost laughed at myself for being sucked in by a trend. I reached to stop the recording. That's when I heard it. Faint. So faint I thought I imagined it. A voice, slurring through the static like it had to push through layers just to reach me. Help me. Don't go. I froze. My thumb hovered over the stop button, my ears strained. But the voice was gone. Just more static now. Maybe interference, I told myself. Maybe my brain was filling in the gaps, like when you see faces in clouds. Still, I saved the clip. Just in case. As I climbed into bed, I couldn't shake the chill that had settled in my spine. The voice kept echoing in my head. Help me. Don't go. I turned the lights off and pulled the blankets up to my chin. It's just a silly app, I whispered. Nothing real. I tried to believe it. I really did. But as I drifted off, I couldn't help but wonder why those particular words had felt so directed. And why, for the first time since I moved in, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt watched. I didn't plan to listen to the recording again the next morning. I thought I'd deleted it, honestly. Or at least hoped I had. But when I opened the app, there it was. A saved file titled simply Session 1. I tapped play, almost out of reflex, expecting nothing but the white hiss of static. Instead, I heard something new. At first, it was the same. Static. The low rush of artificial white noise. Then came the faint voice again. Help me. Don't go. But this time, layered beneath it was something else. A second voice. Higher. Softer. A child's laugh. I sat up straighter. The sound was brief, no more than a second. But it chilled me more than the desperate whisper had. The laugh didn't belong. It was sharp and echoing, like it had bounced off the walls of the very room I was sitting in. I rewound the audio, put on headphones, and listened again. Static. The woman's voice. Then, unmistakably, a child's laughter, followed by what I can only describe as the distant, muffled cry of a baby. I pulled the headphones off and stared at the screen. I hadn't heard any of that last night. I would have remembered, wouldn't I? I checked the timestamp. It was from exactly the moment I had hit record. I was alone, the cabin was locked, and the nearest neighbor was miles away. And yet, the sounds on the recording didn't seem imported. They weren't radio fragments or glitchy distortions. They felt present, like they'd happened in the space around me. Not from beyond, but from within. I shook the thought off and stood to stretch, trying to distract myself. As I moved toward the kitchen, the floor beneath me creaked loudly. I paused. It was the same kind of creak I'd heard layered into the recording. I was sure of it now. For the rest of the day, I couldn't escape the feeling of being observed. The cabin had always been quiet, but now it felt still, in that tense, unnatural way, right before something happens. Like the air had weight, like the walls were waiting. That evening, I sat with a book and tried to drown my thoughts in fiction. But the noises started again. Faint creaks from upstairs, as if someone was pacing slowly. Then a soft tap, tap, tap from the hallway. I muted the television. Silence. I turned on the EVP app again, almost without thinking, and let it record while I sat motionless, listening. Later, I played it back. The creaks, the taps. Then, my own voice, quiet, breathy, whispering something I couldn't quite understand. But I hadn't spoken. I sat frozen, phone still in hand, heart pounding in my chest. That voice was mine. I recognized the inflection, the rasp in the tone, but I didn't remember saying a word. I hadn't spoken since starting the recording. I hadn't moved. I was alone. And still, something had spoken through me. By the time I finally made it to bed, the unease had turned to dread. I locked the door to my bedroom, even though no one else was in the house. I turned on the lamp beside the bed, letting its soft amber glow fill the corners of the room. But it didn't help. The shadows still moved. The silence still pressed in. And I couldn't stop hearing that laugh. After hearing the baby's cry and the strange creaks that mirrored my steps, I decided to stop using the app. I figured it had played its trick on me. Maybe it was pulling audio from random files or generating sounds to mess with people like me. Bored, lonely, curious. But then came the third night. I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the shadows pooling in the corners of the bedroom, watching them stretch unnaturally as the wind stirred the trees outside. Around 1:45 a.m., I picked up my phone. The app was still there, still installed, still glowing with that red record button. I don't know why I did it, but I set an alarm for 2 a.m. Something about the silence made the air feel heavier at that hour. I told myself I was doing it to prove the first two recordings were coincidence, tricks of light and sound. I needed to prove it. At 1:59, I sat in the center of the living room with the phone on the floor beside me and hit record. The static returned instantly, rising like steam from an invisible kettle. It hissed softly, steadily, like before. I stayed perfectly still. At 2:07 a.m., a loud slam echoed through the house, above me. I froze. The sound had come from upstairs. I stared at the ceiling, heart thundering in my chest. There shouldn't have been any noise. I hadn't touched any doors. Everything was locked. I made sure of it before I sat down. After a few minutes of sitting motionless in fear, I worked up the nerve to climb the stairs. My legs felt like wet paper. I flipped on the hallway light and checked every room. Nothing was open. Nothing was out of place. No broken locks. No shattered glass. Just silence. I replayed the recording. The door slam was there. Clear. Violent. And then, after the slam, a sound that made my blood run cold. My own voice, whispering. But I hadn't said a word during the session. I was sure of it. I put the phone to my ear, closed my eyes, and listened. "He's watching," the whisper said. My voice, my cadence, but not my words. A chill crept up my spine. I felt the air around me go still, like the entire house was holding its breath again. I whispered aloud, half to myself, "What is this?" But I already knew. The recordings weren't just picking up sounds from the air. They were picking up something else. That night, I lay awake in bed, clutching the phone in both hands like a talisman, unsure whether to delete the app or keep recording. A strange part of me, some thread of twisted curiosity, wanted to hear more. But another part of me, the deeper part, the one that keeps you alive, was already screaming that whatever I was letting in, it had already found a way to respond. And it sounded a lot like me. The first thing I noticed the next morning was the chair. It had moved. Not far. Just a few inches from where I'd left it in the living room. But it was off-center now, slightly turned toward the hallway. I stood frozen in the doorway, staring at it, trying to remember if I had brushed against it during the night. But I hadn't. I had gone straight to bed after the recording session and barely slept as it was. I pushed the chair back into place, more annoyed than scared, and told myself I must have bumped it. Or maybe I'd imagined how it was placed in the first place. I wasn't about to let paranoia take over. But then, more things started shifting. The blanket on the couch was draped differently when I returned from the kitchen. My keys, usually on the hook by the door, were resting neatly on the center of the coffee table. And the door to the spare room upstairs, the one I always kept closed, was slightly ajar. I was starting to feel like the house was breathing around me, changing, responding. That night, I recorded again. I needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind. I placed the phone on the coffee table, hit record, and sat in silence. This time, I didn't just hear the creaks and knocks. I felt them. Vibrations through the floorboards. The sense of someone, or something, moving just out of sight. When I replayed the audio, my heart dropped. There were footsteps. Heavy ones. Not mine. They walked from the hallway to the center of the living room and stopped, right where I had been sitting. Then came a low, distant groan, like a beam straining under weight. But there was no storm, no wind, no reason for it. And then something new happened. The app glitched. Midway through the playback, the screen glitched and flickered, freezing for a second before jumping to the end. I hadn't touched anything. I restarted it. Same thing. But this time, when I played it again, I heard something I hadn't recorded. A child humming. A lullaby. Soft and broken. Like it was being sung through a cracked music box. It hadn't been there in the original playback. I was sure of it. The app was starting to pull from somewhere else. Somewhere I couldn't explain. At exactly 2:13 a.m., something happened that I still can't reason through. I was sitting in bed, trying to stay calm, when my bedroom door creaked open. On its own. I didn't move. Couldn't move. I stared as the door slowly inched open just enough to reveal a sliver of darkness in the hallway. Then, my phone screen flickered to black. The app kept recording, but I couldn't see anything. I didn't stop it. I couldn't. I was frozen. I waited for the noise, any noise, but nothing came. Not until I replayed the audio. The recording began with soft static, like usual. Then, footsteps again. Slower this time. Dragging. Then, a scream. Not loud, not even clear, but unmistakable. A woman's voice, far away, caught in a moment of agony. The kind of sound you don't forget once you've heard it. I dropped the phone on the floor. I didn't want to hear the rest. I didn't want to know what the app would say next. But a part of me, some morbid, compelled part, knew it wasn't over. The house wasn't just reacting to me. It was answering. By now, the app felt less like a curiosity and more like a parasite. But I couldn't stop using it. I told myself I needed answers, that I needed to understand what was happening inside the cabin. But deep down, I knew something else was driving me. Something that wasn't mine. I started placing the phone in different rooms before I went to sleep, letting it record on its own. I wouldn't listen to the clips until morning. Somehow, it felt safer that way. Like distance made a difference. The first night, I left the phone in the upstairs hallway, just outside the room I never used. At dawn, I played the recording. For the first few minutes, it was quiet, just the ambient creaks of an old house settling. Then the knocks began. 3 sharp ones, followed by a pause, then two more, then one. It almost felt like a pattern, like something was trying to communicate. Next came the breathing, shallow, uneven. It was close, right next to the phone's mic, like someone standing over it. I paused the playback. My hands were shaking. I couldn't breathe. I backed away from the phone like it might reach out and grab me. Eventually, I forced myself to listen to the rest. At the 7-minute mark, a small voice whispered, "Where's Mommy?" It was a child, not a recording from another room, not a noise from outside. The voice was inside the house, as clear as if it had come from just down the hallway. I knew then, without a doubt, that I wasn't alone. I started noticing cold spots in the house, places where the air felt heavy and still, like the warmth had been drained. The hallway, the end of the staircase, the corner of the kitchen where the old wall clock hung but hadn't ticked since I moved in. I tried to ignore it, tried to explain it, but each time the same cold crept back, closer. Then, one night, I caught something I can't erase from my mind. I had left the phone in the living room, recording overnight. When I reviewed the waveform the next morning, I noticed a strange spike at 2:11 a.m. Not audio, but visual. I played the section back. It was mostly quiet. Some rustling, what sounded like faint humming. But as I watched the waveform ripple across the screen, something flickered. A shape, not a sound, not static. A face, brief, distorted, and unmistakable, surfaced for less than a second in the app's visualization. Eyes wide, mouth open, features twisted in a silent scream. I deleted the clip instantly, but it didn't help. That night, I dreamed of it. That same face, pressing against the screen from inside, like the glass was the only thing keeping it from crawling through. Every shadow now felt alive. Every sound was a warning. I kept checking over my shoulder, kept locking and unlocking the doors as if it mattered. But no matter where I went in the cabin, the feeling remained. Something was watching me, and whatever it was, it wanted me to see it. It started happening every night. The recordings would run perfectly until 2:13 a.m., then cut off like someone had yanked the cord on reality itself. No static, no fade out, just a clean and sudden end. I didn't notice it at first, not until I started looking at the timestamps. It was always the same, always 2:13. After the 5th night in a row, I started setting my alarm just before then, dragging myself out of bed to watch it happen live. The phone would be recording, everything normal, and then, without warning, the screen would glitch, go black, and the app would crash. When I checked the file the next morning, the same pattern was there. Silence at the end, as if time itself had paused. But one night, it didn't stop. It was a Wednesday, a cold one. The wind scratched at the windows like something trying to claw its way in. I felt it in my gut, like the house was warning me to stay awake. So I did. I sat in the hallway just outside my bedroom, the phone propped against the baseboard, recording. I kept my eyes on the screen, willing it not to die. The seconds ticked closer. 2:11, 2:12. Then came the sound. It didn't come from the phone. It came from upstairs. A dragging noise, slow, deliberate, like someone pulling something heavy across the attic floor. I didn't move. At 2:13 exactly, the screen on the phone flickered. But this time, it didn't go black. It froze. I leaned closer, breath held tight in my throat. The app didn't crash. It stayed locked, frozen on a jagged waveform, a sharp peak, more intense than anything I'd seen before. Then the sound broke through. A scream, high-pitched, raw, not just fear, but despair. A woman's voice, cracked with agony, shattered the silence. Then a pause. Then the sound of a child, sobbing, panicked, gasping between cries. I dropped the phone. It slid across the floor and hit the wall, still frozen, still humming faint static through the speaker. I crawled to it on hands and knees, heart pounding so hard I couldn't hear anything else. I tapped the screen. It wouldn't respond. And then, under the static, A voice cut through like a razor, whispered, icy, close. Get out. Not a suggestion, not a plea, a command. I stumbled back and kicked the phone across the floor in a panic. It hit the far wall and went dark. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't close my eyes. I sat in the living room with every light on, watching the front door, waiting for it to open, waiting for someone or something to step inside. But no one came. In the morning, I found the phone beside the couch. It had restarted itself. The app was open. The recording was saved. I didn't dare play it again. I knew what it said. I knew what it meant. And I knew one thing above all else. I wasn't welcome here anymore. I didn't wait for nightfall. The moment the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows through the frosted glass windows, I started packing. I didn't even turn off the lights. I just moved from room to room, stuffing clothes and chargers into a duffel bag, grabbing my keys and wallet from the table, careful not to look too long at the hallway mirror, where I swore I'd seen something standing behind me the night before. By 1:55 a.m., I was in the car. I didn't care where I went. I just knew I couldn't be in that house at 2:13 again. I couldn't hear that scream one more time. I left the app running. I don't know why. Maybe to prove to myself that it wasn't all in my head. Maybe to leave behind a trail in case I disappeared. The phone sat face down on the passenger seat, still recording as I backed out of the driveway, the cabin's silhouette shrinking behind me in the rearview mirror. And that's when I saw it. A shadow, standing by the upstairs window. Not a shape or a trick of light, an actual figure. Still, watching. I didn't stop. I didn't blink. I pressed harder on the gas and drove into the darkness of the winding road, surrounded by forest. It wasn't until I reached the main road that I felt like I could breathe again. The app dinged. My heart skipped. I glanced at the screen. One new file saved. Final session. I hesitated. Then I hit play. The recording was mostly car engine noise, static, and the occasional creak of the dashboard. But around the 3-minute mark, something cut through the static. Soft, clipped, and unmistakably not from the car. A voice. You're too late. My blood ran cold. It was a woman. Same voice from the earlier screams, but this time calmer. Sad. Final. Then the recording ended. No timestamp glitch. No crash. Just silence. By sunrise, I found myself parked outside a small roadside diner, miles from the cabin. I stepped inside, ordered coffee, and sat shaking at a window booth as the first light of day reached the horizon. My hands were still trembling when I unlocked my phone and deleted the app. Gone. But it wasn't over. When I opened my gallery to clear out my photos, I found a folder I didn't recognize. It wasn't labeled with the app's name, but it held dozens of waveform images, all time-stamped, all labeled by night. They had been saved automatically, even ones I never remembered recording, and embedded into one of the waveform shapes, zoomed in so far it took me a minute to see it, was the outline of that same face from before, eyes open, staring straight back at me. Later that day, I returned to town and went straight to the library. I had to know if there was a reason, if something had happened in that house before me. I found it in the archives. A short article from January 1986. Tragedy in winter storm. Mother and child freeze in isolated cabin. Apparently, a woman and her young son had gotten stranded in the cabin during a freak blizzard. They'd lost power, no cell service back then. She'd tried calling for help from an old landline. By the time rescuers arrived, it was too late. The house was buried in snow. The phone had gone dead. They found her near the fireplace, clutching the child to her chest. A quote from the firefighter who found them stuck with me. They called for help. No one came. I don't know what the app really tapped into, some lingering echo or something more intelligent, something still there. But I know this. I wasn't supposed to hear them, and once I did, they didn't want me to leave.